If you're torn between getting an FX6, an FX3, or even an A7S3, how that fits into the picture, this is going to be a good video for you to watch. Today we're going to be chatting with my mate Josh about the real-world use of an FX6 versus an FX3, how the A7S3 fits into that, and how after a lot of chat back and forth, I ultimately decided to cancel my FX6 order because the FX3 makes more sense both practically and financially. A preface before we jump into the conversation that Josh and I have: we both shoot different things but in very similar styles. A lot of run and gun, a lot of handheld. Knowing that prior to going into this conversation will just make it make a little bit more sense. Josh is going to introduce himself, and then the gear obsessive conversation takes place. Enjoy.
Chris, thanks so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure being able to chat with you about camera stuff and all that kind of stuff. And my channel is really about small-scale sustainable farming. I have a small market garden, which is a very small farm for growing vegetables, but I also interview farmers and do farm tours and do a lot of instructional content. But been doing about 2 years, and my channel's grown pretty significantly. And in that time frame, I've really fallen in love with filmmaking, videography, and camera stuff. So that's why we're talking today.
I agree. I think we can very much agree that we're both very much gearheads for sure. And that's why we're talking about the FX6. So we'll go straight into it, really. The FX6, I've had it pre-ordered now since February. And it's something that I really, really wanted. When I got that camera on loaner from Sony, I loved using it. I loved the hand grip. I loved just the placement of the hand and how you can hold it, where all the custom buttons were there. Heavier body for obviously shooting handheld. I want to eliminate being able to use a tripod and a monopod when I'm at a wedding, and I just want to shoot everything handheld. Longer battery life, just more reliable. All the tally lights it had on it. The built-in ND obviously is the big thing there as well. And you had the FX6 and you used it a lot. And you ultimately sold it, and you're now with an FX3. So I am very interested in your feedback you have on the FX3, and just kind of to tell everyone some things to watch out for, really. Or because you've talked me out of it now, and I want you to talk everyone else out of it potentially as well.
Well, yeah, it's a hard decision, Chris. I mean, a camera like the FX6 comes out, and you get really excited about it, and everyone's talking about it, and I think there's a lot of amazing things about it, and you have to remember that no camera is perfect, and and everyone's situation is different, right? Like my case is different than your case and someone else's case. And I've always wanted to work my way up to a cinema camera. I've owned like the C100 Mark II, the C200, and I kept on falling back to mirrorless cameras for the form factor, mainly ease of use. And the ND filter was the biggest thing for me with the FX6 because I shoot mostly outside, and that's a huge selling point for me. But it's not a heavier camera. Like, it's a very light camera, and when I shoot handheld, I was really just missing the IBIS, and that was, to me, that was one of the bigger things, even than the ND filter for me.
And everyone's going to say, "Oh, you don't need IBIS," but that whole argument of not needing IBIS in cinema cameras in general is because cinema cameras are heavier, like a lot heavier, right? But I don't think people realize the FX6 is actually, it's pretty light. Like when you get it, it feels like an empty plastic shell, pretty much, right? Like it doesn't, until you start adding on a heavy lens and a hand grip, like the unit on its own, I can't remember what it is, but it doesn't weigh a lot. So you do have those micro jitters, and unless you have a lens that has optical steady shot on it, it's pretty useless handheld.
I think so too. I mean, for slow motion, it worked great, but in like 24p, it was super shaky. And even with like the 24 to 105 that has OSS, which I bought for that camera, and I know you did too.
Same, exactly.
It was
just sold it.
Yeah,
now.
it was. I'm probably gonna sell mine too, but it wasn't very steady, and I think that's what you have to keep in mind. And I don't like to add a lot of stuff to my camera, so I wasn't like gonna put rails and an external battery and like a monitor. Like I want to keep it pretty small because generally a lot of the stuff I'm doing is very run and gun. I'm on farms. I'm moving around a lot. So to me, like I just shot a bunch of stuff with the active steady shot in the FX3. Yeah, and it's unbelievable, and with a non-stabilized lens, and it's amazing.
And that's the kicker there, really, the non-stabilized lens. Like there's very few Sony lenses that actually have OSS built into them. Like the 24 to 105, 7200, I think both the GM and the F4, the 90mm macro, but that limits in what you can use, really. So if you want to start using primes, like I know you just bought the 51.2 and you've convinced me to buy the 51.2, it doesn't have OSS. So realistically speaking, you can't shoot handheld at 24 frames a second with the FX6. So,
I don't think so. Yeah. Unless you want to put it on a gimbal, and I'm not a big gimbal fan. So
yeah.
And I think looking forward, Sony's not going to be putting emphasis on OSS. I just don't see them doing that with
Agreed.
the kind of stabilization they have in their bodies. So unless you want to shoot with those f4 zooms, then you're kind of stuck with shaky video.
Yep.
And so I really like, if I'm shooting on a zoom lens, I want 2.8. I want that option to be able to to get down there. So,
but your experience with the FX3, you've been liking it so far?
Yeah, so just a little background with my camera history. I mean, I got the A7S3 when it came out, or right after it came out, and I think that the FX6 and A7S3 was going to be a perfect combination. And then the FX3 comes out, and there's all this hate on it because I think people just...
There was a lot of hate.
Yeah, I think it's the camera everybody wanted.
Yep.
You know, I think, like, realistically, if you're buying an A7S3, like, you want a video camera for the most part. And so I think there was a lot of that. And so I thought that was the perfect situation. And then after shooting with the FX6 for a while, I realized this is not the right camera for me. Like, the FX3 is a much better camera for my needs.
I agree. So tell me about, well, obviously the FX6 is a cinema camera, but it does use, I believe it's the same sensor as the A7S3 and the FX3. What do you find in terms of image quality? Is there any difference between the FX6 and the FX3? Or the A7S3?
I really didn't notice.
No?
I didn't really notice much difference. One thing is you can take down the noise reduction, but like to me, like the way I use cameras, like I'd rather it just be cleaner coming out of the camera. And so that was a thing, is like, am I going to schlep this camera around for the same image quality? Like, to me, I'll use an ND filter on the front. I mean, there's a couple things I miss a lot. I mean, the buttons and the ergonomics are awesome.
That's beautiful, yeah.
But I find the FX3 like pretty much has everything I mean, there's a button for peaking. There's a button for zebras right on the back. Like, if you need a quick white balance has its own button. Like, you don't have to program as much stuff. And so I don't find that it's set up for video, like much more than the A7S is. And that's been awesome. I wish it had shutter angle. I wish it had a waveform built into the camera. Those are the things I miss from the FX6 going to the FX3.
Do you not think if they could just somehow include IBIS in it, maybe make the body a little bit bigger, like it would be the perfect camera? Like, and obviously include the other things that you just said as well.
The first camera to have IBIS and built-in NDs would be, that's it.
Yeah.
But I think if anyone hasn't used the FX6 or the FX9 with that variable ND filter, that is the coolest thing ever invented.
When it's on auto, it just does it all for you. Just point out whatever, and you can't even tell it's doing it either. It's seamless.
Yeah, I just like the ultimate variability. Like, I'd rather have an ND filter on the front where I can go 2.5, 3.5 stops versus hard stops. I find that to be what I'm doing most of the time. Is I lock out all the exposure and then I'll just change the ND filter.
So, Josh, you had an A7S3 and you sold it to get another FX3, or you're getting another FX3, right? Yeah. So, what was the reasoning behind that? Because that's something I'm kind of thinking of doing when the A7 IV comes out. And the A7 IV will be my stills camera, sell the A7S3 and 2 FX3s. Because I think they're better cameras for video. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times people think of a B cam as a different camera. But if your B cam is the same as your A cam, like, it just simplifies workflow. When you pick up the camera, you don't have to think about where the buttons are, what the settings are. And you're never like, hey, maybe I should grab this camera that's all rigged up because the image quality is going to be slightly better. Like, no, just grab the other one. It's the same camera. And so I know that the image is going to be the same out of the A7S3 and the FX3. But to me, like, I can grab either camera. It's exactly the same. And I'm not confused when I pick up a camera.
And that's it as well, because the A7S3 and the FX3, although they're the same, essentially, they handle very differently when you're setting them up, right? And like, to use... I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. I did talk about it in a video before, but they've got a lot of quirks. There's some weird quirks between the two, and they don't function the same way. You found that too?
Yeah, I watched your video about the FX3 versus A7S3, and I think you summed it up really well. It's these things that most people don't realize until they use the camera. It just feels more like a video camera. It's hard to describe. I haven't had any overheating issues with the A7S3, but I know that I'm outside shooting in the heat a lot, and it just makes me feel a little bit better that this thing will definitely not overheat. So
for sure,
that's a nice, yeah. And to me, one of the biggest things is why I wanted an FX6 was the ND filter, but also having XLR inputs. And I know you can get the adapter for the A7S3, the XLR K3M, but like, this has it built in. It's ready to go. And a lot of cinema cameras have the XLRs in the handle.
Yep.
So it really is kind of like a, little cinema camera in that way.
In actual fact, the FX3 is kind of better, really, in terms of if you want to remove the handle and have more of a run and gun smaller setup or throw it on a gimbal, you can. With the FX6, you remove that handle and you've got 0 audio options. There's no XLR, there's no 3.5, like you got nothing. So yeah, the FX3 is a better camera, really.
I think so. And then, so for me, like with my two FX3s, one is set up for when I'm filming myself. So I just put like a Rode Video Mic Pro Plus on the top and a wide zoom. And that's my like vlogging camera. And then the other one is basically set up with the top handle, XLR mics, and all that other stuff. So, and I actually like the form factor because you don't have the EVF bump on the top, which I never use EVF. So it's no difference to me. It just makes the camera squatter.
You say that because I used to use the EVF all the time with the A7 III. And then when I got the A7S3, just because it was habit, I found myself using the EVF as well. And we're talking about like bright summer day, I'm at a wedding, just to be safe, I'm looking through the EVF, but I realized it was a habit. Once it's gone now, I don't need it. The screen is completely fine in bright sunlight. Like you can see it completely clearly.
The other thing about the FX6 is that I did not like the screen on that at all, and it's so awkward and clunky, and like another thing you have to like fold up and put in your bag and worry about breaking, and it just wasn't worth it to me. And the other thing was the autofocus is very different between the two cameras, and the touch tracking that you get on the FX3 is amazing, and you don't get that on the FX6.
Nope.
I did like the FX6 for the face only, like it locks on even if the person leaves. That I wish was in the FX3 for interviews and things like that. But overall, like it seems like the autofocus is just easier to work for run and gun on the FX3.
Yeah, agreed. The only exception I miss is the manual focus override on the FX6. I don't know if you ever used it. That was really nice. So you have it in auto. You want to turn it and focus on something else, you can, and then it will just flick back to. I love that. That was a great feature. I don't see why that can't be implemented on the FX3. Maybe we'll see it in an update. I don't know, but I loved that feature.
Yeah, I never really use that because if I want to go to manual, I just hit the little switch on the lens and then I'm in manual. Yeah. So to me, I'm either like shooting full automatic focus if I'm like interviewing or filming myself. Yeah. If I'm doing B-roll, I'm more often using manual focus anyways. Yeah. Though, Chris, like I really did not like that screen and it like sticking out and like even with the little hood on it and everything, like, no thanks.
And it doesn't auto-rotate. You have to flick the button on the top of it. And strangely, it was actually higher res, but it didn't really ever seem like it. Do you not think?
No.
It was, that's 2.3 million dots. And, because I remember looking at that and going, it's going to be a high res screen, but it didn't feel like it.
No, and it wasn't very bright at all.
No, it was very dim. It reminded me of, if you ever had a video camera, it reminded me of that. And I know it is, it's a cinema camera, but it reminded me of like a video camera's screen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did not like that screen at all. And like lots of things connected to it. I can't just like, I'm moving around on farms and to me it was like I needed a bigger bag to carry it in. Like I can shove 2 FX3s, and a bunch of lenses in a case and everything's in one box. To me it was like I have another thing, it takes longer to set it up. I'm more nervous with it on a tripod out in the field. All that kind of stuff, man, it just adds up.
Yeah, just deterred you from using it, really, ultimately. Now, did you buy the FX3 before you got the FX6, or did you sell that first?
I had the A7S3, bought the FX6, and then I think when I decided to sell the FX6, I bought an FX3.
Okay.
And then once I used it for a while, I was like, all right, let me sell my A7S3 and get a second FX3.
And that's the key takeaway from all this. You had both, and you still ended up using the FX3. And I think that's a big point there that people can take away from. Like for run and gun, the FX3 just made more sense.
But if you're comparing the FX3 versus FX6, like I don't see in the US $2,200 difference and all the logistics that go with it. Yeah. I think the bigger battery is a big selling point, but I know we talked about an external battery for the FX3, which is an option too. So
the Anton overall ones,
I'm really happy with it. I've been shooting a lot with the FX3 and it's pretty close to perfect for me.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you for coming on and sharing your opinions about it and saving me some money, I think, potentially long term, just talking me out of the FX6. And I guess it's a good thing, really, that it's been delayed for me so much, because otherwise I would already have it and I probably could have sold it for the same amount that I bought it for as well, but in hindsight, it's a good thing. So thank you.
You're very welcome, Chris. I think a lot of people need to realize that it's not always the camera you think you need. You have to really think about your use case and what makes the most sense for you. I've always wanted to have a cinema camera because I thought that's what I needed. But frankly, these little cameras are so much more powerful than you realize. And when you really look at the image at the end of the day, that's really what matters.
Yep. Perfect. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Josh.
So hopefully that little chat was of some use to you. If you shoot in a similar style to either of us do, then this might have changed your mind a little bit about the FX6, like it changed my mind. I was convinced on that camera for the longest time, but after chatting with someone that really got to use it in a proper way for an extended period of time, it just makes sense that the FX3 is actually a better camera for me. So hopefully you got something out of this. Otherwise, you are a trooper for getting right to the end. Thank you. I appreciate you. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.